The third session of today is Attracting Finance with Robust Corporate Climate Transition Plans. It is our honor to have Mr. Patrick Ho, Deputy Head of Sustainable Development of Swire Properties Limited, to deliver his keynote presentation. Mr. Ho, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, BC, for the invitation. And it's my great pleasure today to share Swire Properties' latest endeavors on the topic of climate transition plan and strategies. As I only have 10 minutes, allow me to dive in straight. As a climate transition plan, as shared by Sherry, is a time-bound action plan that outlines how a company pivots its existing XX operations and entire business model towards a trajectory that aligns with the latest and most ambitious climate science recommendations. That is basically to halve GHG emissions by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. I try to break down this plan into this climate action cycle and transition plan consisting of, you see the circle, 4 components, namely climate governance and strategy, targets, actions, and disclosure, where you will see our various corporate commitments and initiatives are mapped against the cycle. And also the overarching at the bottom, green financing support for all these works, as highlighted at the bottom. So I will go into details into individual components within the time limit. So since 2016, when Swire Properties first launched our corporate SC 2030, Sustainable Development 2030 strategy, we have already established a robust and inclusive climate governance structure. From the top, we have the board that have the oversight, and having climate issues and risk discussed every quarterly. And at the senior executive level, chaired by our chief executive, Tim Blackburn, actually lead the ESG steering committee that steer all of the works related to climate, ensure our science-based target and all sort of decarbonization works are on track. And finally down to the working level, we have 5 SD working groups where we have over 110 colleagues that work diligently on executing and realizing the KPIs set under a climate transition plan. So climate management has been integrated in the incentive scheme and compensation in our workforce, from the chief executive level to individual portfolio general managers level down to our individual employees, where the employer annual performance development review and goal setting is actually aligned to the SC 2030 strategies, 5 pillars. So a climate transition plan should first be underpinned by a robust scenario analysis, sort of to help us to identify potential substantive climate-related risk and opportunities. On physical climate risk, since 2018, we have already started to conduct asset-level modeling of both the acute and chronic physical risks associated with 4 IPCC climate scenarios, covering in immediate term to the distant future of 2050 or by the end of the century. It also includes very detailed asset-level assessment that evaluate individual buildings' sensitivity and adaptive capacity to the potential impacts of the identified climate risks. And the result of which help us to identify overall there are low to moderate levels of risk of flooding, heat stress, water stress, and extreme wind for our global portfolio in all SS climate scenarios. And these risk levels are actually attributed to the relatively robust adaptive capacity and mitigation measures we have already integrated into our building design. However, we have, of course, also identified short and mid-term measures for these individual buildings to mitigate risk and build resilience across our portfolio. So for new development projects, we have adopted a much enhanced approach to future-proof our development, which on one hand, update our climate models to incorporate the latest available climate science upon the release of the result of IPCC 8R6 report in 2022. And we also perform deep dive hazard modeling for selected projects, such as urban drainage modeling, river flood modeling, and coastal hydrodynamic modeling using outputs from these climate models. And the results are analyzed actually to generate very practical and actionable climate-related parameters and design concepts for all of the whole design team. For example, we interface with the project architect, MEP consultant, flood consultant, etc., to ensure the sufficient climate-related considerations are incorporated into the designs, which a lot of time these design goes beyond what the building code is required. I think this is very super important for enhancing the long-term climate resilience for our buildings. So on transition risk, in accordance with TCFD's recommendation, we have identified a total of 13 risk and opportunity drivers that may have a financial impact on our business under these three climate scenarios, namely net zero scenario, 1.5 degree, Paris consistent scenario, and the hot house world scenario. So these scenarios, however, are not intended, of course, to be predictions of the future, but more they seek to stress test Swire Properties business against several plausible future states. So with the support of a risk consultant, we have facilitated workshops, many workshops with 60 cross-functional subject matter experts within the company to come together to evaluate the vulnerability, current and planned practices and controls, adaptability, and future risk exposure. And the participants also debate a lot on the impact on the risk and opportunity on our financial performance. For example, on the revenue, expenditures, and also financial positions. For example, assets and liabilities, capital and financing. So for certain risks, the outputs of the workshop will fit into some actuarial models, risk models, to predict what the potential financial impacts could be across our global, across different probabilities. I can tell these financial results have been very useful to inform our senior executive and the board to actually demonstrate that our sustainability strategies that has effectively helped the company to manage these transition risks and capture opportunities from the transition to a net zero economy. So moving on, a climate transition plan, I think, should also contain time-bound, verified science-based targets, which are in line with the latest climate science. So as a first mover in setting science-based target in Hong Kong, I'm glad to see that our near-term 1.5 degree aligned science-based target covers, our whole value chain, Scope 1 and Scope 2 for direct operation, and it's also Scope 3 for both upstream and body carbon and downstream emissions from our tenants. And of course, more importantly, we have been making really good progress in realizing that reduction. You can see we have achieved 28% by 2022, and also for downstream leases as Scope 3, we have reduced 40%. So that is a bit exceed our target. And in 2022, we also start to conduct independent data assurance for our tenants' emission under Scope 3, in addition to data assurance on Scope 1 and Scope 2. And in addition to setting near-term science-based target for the next 5 to 10 years, companies should also set a net zero long-term target by 2050 at the latest. On this, we have published our net zero roadmap to the market. Of course, this is still a living document, but of course, it has set out a clear trajectory of our strategic investment and actions across our global portfolio, as well as in our value chain to deliver our net zero commitment. And in terms of strategy, we have come a long way to deliver our net zero strategies, and which covers all these important components addressing the whole life cycle GHG emissions, from climate resilient design, embodied carbon, to building level active and passive strategies, to the use of digitization tools and innovative technologies, and extended to tenant engagement, and finally on renewable procurement. In terms of innovative strategy, we have started to introduce net zero design in our new development, for example, in Xi'an, Taikoo Li Xi'an, where we make use of a great deal of renewable geothermal energy that can actually provide over 60% of heating energy in winter that drastically reduce the carbon emissions. On the right-hand side, at Taikoo Li Sanlitun, Beijing, we were the first commercial adopter of this integrated PEDF, photovoltaic, energy storage, direct current, flexible power distribution system, where we revolutionize the way we generate and distribute renewable energy in a flexible grid. To provide a credible and scientific approach to assess Hong Kong buildings transition to net zero, Hong Kong Green Building Council has recently launched a zero carbon ready building certification scheme, which Swire Prop was also heavily involved in the development. And also we are very glad to have 13 buildings, the highest number among all participants participated, and that means participate in the scheme, and that means the energy performance of both the landlord and also the tenant portions of the energy use intensity are disclosed to the market transparently. Really the first time in Hong Kong. And also the performance are benchmarked with a really localized Hong Kong database. So among our participating buildings, our performance is shown here. Among our participating buildings, we have 2 buildings, 1 Taikoo Place and 2 Taikoo Place, which are the newest buildings. They have attained the second best rating, not net zero ready yet, but a super low rating for both landlord and tenant portions. And other buildings also have obtained extra low energy and so on. So a lot to catch up before we can, really claim ourselves to be zero ready. But the essence of this scheme, I want to say, is that it helps us to identify where our gaps are, and also to help us establish a roadmap to attain the ultimate zero carbon ready rating That is relevant to Hong Kong built environment. Rather than, if we don't do that, we will become carbon stranded if you look at the climate transition. I think this scheme is very important to really help the Hong Kong builders to assess their individual buildings' performance against the carbon climate transition. So on addressing embodied carbon, we have introduced low carbon procurement specifications in main contracts and specify performance-based targets on embodied carbon for major construction materials. We also did a pilot study with National University of Singapore to measure the whole life cycle carbon for residential building in Hong Kong, which would help us to identify new strategies to address these particular scope 3 emissions that are often sort of neglected. On general supply chain management, we also started to deploy EcoVadis ESG assessment platform, actually to support our critical suppliers to measure the emissions and to identify the support we, as a landlord, as a client, can support and offer to them to improve their carbon and ESG performance. For downstream lease assets, I'm very pleased to see that our investment in our many bespoke tenant engagement programs, such as this one, the Green Performance Pledge, which is targeting our office tenants, has gained a lot of traction. Almost 40% of our office tenants in Hong Kong and Chinese mainland portfolio has already committed. And together, they have achieved this fantastic impact on the right-hand side on energy, water, and waste reduction, as verified by our data analysis from a lot of metering systems that we have established. And these are some of the participant companies. I wish that would also become a reason when you move your office in future to come to Swire Properties portfolio. And on F&B side, similar to GPP, we have this Green Kitchen initiative to support our F&B tenants to design and operate a sustainable restaurant. We have achieved a major milestone last month for having more than 100 F&B tenants obtain our Green Kitchen Award. As you can see very clearly, there are, of course, measurable impact achieved by the Thai-based Seoul restaurant by Maxim's Group at our Pacific Place as a proof point. So lastly, as part of a strategy to facilitate climate transition, we have also outlined our financial planning. And we have established 14 climate-related financial metrics for regular disclosure. For example, 97% of our total attributable gross rental income are from green buildings, certified green buildings, and our 3-year in the middle, around 49 million are from the 3-year budgeted forecast for climate-related projects. And on the right-hand side, our sustainable procurement amount and climate-related exposure on the green buildings and energy efficiency projects, just to name a few. And this is a breakthrough in our climate strategy in 2023. Swire Properties, and also under the guidance of Swire Group, we have started to pilot the use of internal carbon pricing to determine the potential impact on carbon emissions from our investments and also to quantify the carbon risk to our business operations. It will take place as an internal carbon fee, which link each unit of CO2 emissions to a fixed cost, allowing better relocation of capital towards low carbon investment and activities. With the establishment of a new decarbonization fund under these ICP, we aspire to invest in projects with additionality and bring significant reduction impact. That means beyond BAU decarbonization projects, on top of works that we would done anyway as our normal operations. Swire Properties is committed to integrate sustainability considerations into our financing mechanism. As of now, approximately 60% of our bond and loan facilities are from green financing, green bonds, sustainability-linked loans and green loans, and the recent green dim sum bonds. We have also enjoyed financial benefits from this undertaking. And I know I should stop here, pause here. You may take a look at our Sustainable Development Report for more details, and I would be more than happy to share more at a panel discussion together with my panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ho. Please be seated. Now, may I invite Ms. Ellie Tang, Director of Sustainable Investing of Fidelity International, to deliver her presentation. Ms. Tang, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here to share with you the investor's perspective on how we pursue sustainable investing and, of course, climate transition, which is our big topic today. I'm really happy that Patrick got us a head start to share Swire Properties' excellent approach and the depth they have gone to drive credible climate transition. So if I may, I'll shift gear a little bit as requested by BEC to share with you how investors are looking at credible transition and how we reward companies that are doing well in this space. So just a little bit of, introduction of our organization. Fidelity International is an asset manager, a global one that's managing $714 billion of assets for institutional, wholesale, as well as retail investors. Why does sustainable investing matter to us? I don't think I need to, explain this further. But because we are still privately owned as an asset manager, I think cross-generational wealth matters more to us. And we believe that, our organization with the global presence and local perspective, we're very much in the position to understand, local context when we engage with our investee companies and drive our stewardship activities as an approach to push for our sustainable investing beliefs across themes, be it, climate, nature, social, and et cetera. So I think it's worth sort of clarifying the definitions a bit in the beginning of my sharing. When we talk about sustainable investing or sustainable investments, there's more than one single definition. This graph is a little bit academic or theoretical, but essentially what it's trying to tell you is that in the sort of traditional way of investing, there may be little to no regard to ESG factors or managing ESG risk. It's very much about driving the financial bottom line. But as the world progresses, as we think more about the impact of the financial sector, how we can allocate capital to drive changes, could be positive, could be negative, then we're looking into integrating ESG considerations into various stages of investment. So there comes sustainable investing. So this spectrum basically shows you from traditional investing to a tilt towards ESG or the negative screening approach, meaning excluding the negative sectors or sectors that may not be able to transition towards a more sustainable model, or screening out sin stocks per se, to sort of the far right is sort of driving value impact first. But this is not to say the impact funds, the dedicated sustainable thematic funds are not profitable. It's just that they're also trying to maximize the sustainable outcomes through the strategy, the portfolio design. So I think this is a really important concept to keep in mind when we talk about SI. So how does Fidelity do sustainable investing? We've heard about Swire Properties' amazing work and how they've been able to secure green financing, sustainable financing. So those refer to the transaction and the deals that they have completed to support their general corporate expenses as well as dedicated green project expenses. But sustainable investing is very much about equity investing, fixed income, and different asset classes. So that's a very clear signal to the corporates that if you're really serious about driving ESG from your board to the frontline level, strategy to implementation, you will be rewarded by investors. So in very plain language, sustainable investing is the interplay between data and tools and stewardship activities. Let's start with data and tools, right? I'm sure the corporate audience here very well understand the emergence of ESG ratings. We need to measure, what good ESG looks like, right? So we turn to ratings. I'll come back to that a bit, but essentially at Fidelity, we're very much a research-led, bottom-up research-led asset manager, and we value our fundamental sector analysis. So, your traditional financial analysis. But to go deeper into sustainable investing, we essentially need more data points and more qualitative information to educate our well-rounded 360 understanding of all of the companies and projects that we put our clients' money in. So on top of financial research and rating, we have created our proprietary ESG ratings that are kind of like privy to Fidelity. So that measures the process of a company's ESG integration. So regardless of whether this sector is green or not, this company's green or not, a company could have a pretty high ESG rating depending on the quality of the strategy, performance, disclosure, et cetera. And on the right-hand side, the lighter green squares are essentially telling you that we also have tools that measure the positive outcomes. So this basically assesses a company's products and services and whether they are already or may be contributing to environmental good, social good, or economic good. which I'll zoom in on climate rating a bit more in the interest of today's topic. So I mentioned there are two key tools, right? So we've covered sort of like data and tools. The second one is engagement. If we're corporate audience, I'm sure yourselves from the sustainability department, or if you represent investor relations, this should be very familiar to you. Investors are increasingly paying attention to companies' ESG performance. So fundamental analysts may be representing an investor to ask the corporates specific questions, or may send their ESG or SI team to dive deeper with you. But at Fidelity, I think there's a sort of like first principle to us when it comes to stewardship. We prefer engagement to divestment and exclusion. This is not to say we do not exclude any sector. So like I alluded to earlier, there are sectors that are unable to transform, whether it's by default, by limitations of its sector's operation, or by its unwillingness to become more sustainable. When we don't have a choice, we will use exclusion as the last resort. But in the process of driving better, positive real-world outcomes, we prefer engaging with the companies and understanding more about their ESG awareness, whether their board is fully aware of what should be done. Are they providing oversight of target set? Are they making progress and improvements over time? So we'll be able to create a win-win situation for both the investor as well as the investee company. So this is not about investors coming in to police companies or telling them what to do, because they are very much in the driver's seat. We're just sort of steering and sharing best-in-class practices through these engagements and regular dialogues with senior decision makers of corporates that we invest in. ESG ratings, favorite topic. I'm sure, for the sustainability corporate sustainability practitioners here, like you understand the efforts that we need to put in to drive higher ESG rating scores, et cetera, et cetera. There's no right or wrong, but from Fidelity's perspective, based on our observation, we find that there's little consistency between various third-party research providers' ESG rating methodologies. So for us as a user, we need to analyze company data. It doesn't really provide much clarity or tell us, what good looks like, because a company could have very different rating outcomes by, different agencies' opinion. And this is because a lot of these external methodologies tend to focus on public disclosures only. So by definition, companies that are located in jurisdictions that don't have an ESG reporting mandate may be lagging behind more developed markets, mature ESG reporting entities. And the sort of shortcoming of looking at public disclosure only is that you're basically focusing on backward-looking data rather than trying to understand, the upcoming strategy and the trajectory of a company's ESG performance. So that's why we decided to create our own ESG rating. Just to highlight a few sort of differentiating traits of our design, we have more materiality maps as compared to the common external methodology, which means we'll have a better understanding of the nuances of each sector and be able to combine it with our fundamental analysis to understand what is happening on the ground. And the assignment of ESG rating at Fidelity is done by a sector analysis, which goes to assure our investors, our clients, and the companies that we're really looking at everything in one go. And another key design is that on top of an overall ESG score, which we assign to each company that we invest in, we also have a pillar score, which breaks down ES and G. So that basically avoids the situation of diffusing the good and the bad by adding them up and taking an average. But more importantly, I'd like to highlight the trajectory rating, which puts a company on the map of sort of improving, stable, or deteriorating. And this is a really important signal for us to sort of prioritize our engagement opportunities with companies. So if an investee company has a lower rating but on an improving trajectory, that gives us a reason to go back to the company regularly and understand if they're truly improving. So don't have much time left, but I'll try to cover climate transition very quickly. So our path to net zero basically comprises a few key components. As a founding signatory of the Net Zero Asset Manager Initiative, we have pledged to reduce our portfolio emissions by half by 2030, and then achieve net zero by 2050. In terms of thermal coal, so high impact, high emission, high emitting sector, we will phase out our portfolio exposure to thermal coal and OECD markets by 2030, and then globally by 2040. How do we do that? Again, using tools and stewardship activities. I mentioned earlier we have a climate rating. Essentially, this is a first step for us to understand whether a company is aligning to the Paris Agreement's recommended decarbonization pathway, whether it has strong evidence or down to no evidence of transition. So that helps us sort of like bucket a company according to their strategy, their governance, whether they're spending money to really walk the talk, to drive their targets. And just zooming in on how we engage on the issue of thermal coal. It's more than just approaching the companies that are in coal mining or coal-fired power generation. It's very much about understanding the key drivers, right? Whether their local market allows them to transition, or how long will it take? Is the country still highly dependent on traditional forms of energy, therefore they can't transition yet? And how feasible it is, or how fast it is, could the company adopt more renewables? And what does the timeline look like? What does the budget look like to ensure there's an orderly phase out of thermal coal and no one is left behind? So again, this is very much about environmental and social impact in one systemic theme. So how do we ensure there's a credible transition plan? We've heard from CDP, so I've taken some very useful notes as well. But I like to sort of flag the UK's transition plan task force, which we'll hear more about in our following panel discussion. But essentially, at Fidelity, and I'm sure a lot of asset managers as well, are referencing the transition plan's disclosure framework to sort of assess the credibility and robustness of a company's transition plan. So this basically, it's not just directional, it's kind of recommending the metrics for us to understand where a company is in terms of transition planning. And last but not least, for us to engage on thermal coal related issues and decarbonize these high negative impact sectors, we will in the first go rely on our stewardship activities. If a company shows unwillingness to change, then we'll escalate it to exercise our right as an investor to vote against their management on climate-related issues if they're not taking action. And last but not least, we of course will monitor the Fidelity issue rating that we assign to this company, and if over 18 months the company is not showing any sign of change, then we will look to divest. So hopefully that gave you a pretty quick overview of how we conduct sustainable investing research and what climate transition looks like from an investor's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tang. Please be seated. And before we start our panel discussion, as a reminder, online participants are welcome to use the Q&A box if you have any questions for our speakers. And for the audience in the room, you may raise your hands if you have questions, and we will pass you the mic. Now, please welcome our moderator of this session, Ms. Agnes K.Y. Tai, Director of Great Glory Investment Corporation. Please also welcome our panelists, Ms. Ellie Tang, Director of Sustainable Investing of Fidelity International, Mr. Patrick Ho, Deputy Head of Sustainable Development of Swire Properties Limited, Mr. Ronald Yong, Head of Sustainable Finance Asia of Societe Generale, on stage for the panel discussion. And Dr. Ben Codecote, Director of Oxford Sustainable Finance Group and the Lombard Odier Associate Professor, is joining the discussion virtually as well. Ms. Tai, over to you, please.
Good afternoon. Hello. It's always a challenge to moderate a session like half an hour, 45 minutes after lunch. I have to keep you all awake and engaged. But with our three brilliant speakers just now, I'm sure that you are all ready to listen to what I have to share, as well as ask really good questions. So the topic of today of our panel is attracting finance with robust corporate climate transition plans. And you already know that with us today we have Patrick from Swire Properties, Patrick Ho, Ellie Tang from Fidelity, and also we have Ronald. Ronald is the head of Sustainable Finance Asia at Societe, and also online, Professor Ben Caldecott. I don't know whether I should be looking at that screen or probably this screen. He is a very significant person. He is the director of Oxford Sustainable Finance Group, as well as the UK Centre for Greening Finance and Investments. I'm your moderator, Agnes, and I serve the Climate Governance Initiative both at the global and the Hong Kong level. Climate Governance Initiative advocates 8 climate governance principles that were established by the World Economic Forum back in 2019. Now, I'm not going to be reading all the impressive profiles, otherwise we'll be sitting here until 6 o'clock. And so let me just go right ahead into the questions. Just now we heard from Sherry that Hong Kong is a really important capital market. And would you know that our market cap of our close to around 2,600 listed issuers, our market cap is actually ranging between 12 to 17 times of our GDP. Now, if you hear Warren Buffett, he says 2 times GDP is already a bubble, but we have always been about 12 to 17 times. And this morning, you heard from our government saying that the green, sustainable linked bonds and notes that were issued and were arranged by Hong Kong last year was $80.5 billion US dollars. Now, Hong Kong is a dot on the market, and that $80.5 billion amounts to 9% of global issuance and arrangements. So with that, we know that finance, especially sustainable finance, not only encompass equity and debt capital from investors, but also loans from banks. And with us today, we have banks, we have investment house, and we have academia, and of course, a corporate. And I don't envy Patrick's position because being so good, being a trailblazer is very hard to improve further. But let me just come with the first question, and could I direct the question to you first, Ben? Since Ellie was talking about TPT, and TPT is in your arena, could you share with us something about the transition pathway task force framework that was being announced in October, all these sectoral guidance? And if there is a little bit of time, could you tell us what you see in Europe about transition planning or transition finance that goes to support a just transition? Thanks, Ben.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Agnes, and thank you for that very kind introduction as well. And as you said, Ellie teed up a conversation about the TPT quite well. I think one of the reasons I've been asked to join this panel is that I co-head something called the Transition Plan Task Force that was also referenced, but I'm also an academic based at Oxford University. Let me tell you a bit about the TPT and what we've been doing, why it's important, why it's relevant to this conversation, and then I'll try and answer your question about the just transition as well. So the context for this was the fact that there have been so many net zero commitments and other ambitious climate commitments that companies and financial institutions have made, particularly in the last sort of 3 to 4 years. At COP26 in Glasgow, I was involved in organising that summit in Glasgow. We felt that that was obviously hugely significant that all these commitments were being made, but that we needed to take steps to make sure that those commitments were credible, that people acted on the promises that they were making, and that they had frameworks to deliver on those commitments over time. And that's kind of the genesis of the transition plan task force and the work on transition plans. It's to create this credibility around commitments. The other piece here is to meet growing regulatory requirements. So one of the things that was also announced at COP26 in the UK was that the UK would introduce new mandatory sustainability disclosure requirements, and part of that would be a requirement to disclose transition plans. And that's already the case now on a comply-or-explain basis from accounting year starting January 2022. The Financial Conduct Authority in the UK and the UK government they're launching consultations imminently on that becoming mandatory, a more stringent basis than comply or explain from January 2025. So that will extend to listed companies and large companies as well, not just listed companies. And that requirement's very significant, and other jurisdictions are introducing these requirements as well, and that's partly because they're onboarding the recommendations from the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, that Cherry and others have mentioned as well. But if you don't know what a good transition plan looks like, you can have these requirements and it might not be very useful. And so this task force was created to really define what best practice, what good practice transition plans should look like. And we've run over more than a year now. We started in April of last year, a multi-stakeholder process involving over 100 different organizations, different users, different preparers, as well as academics and other experts, an international process to define what best practice transition plans look like. And we published our final disclosure framework in October of this year, setting out what the elements were, and Ellie very kindly shared a slide showing you what the different elements and sub-elements were. We've designed this for global adoption, so it can be used in Hong Kong, across Asia, across ASEAN. I'm currently in Singapore, so greetings from Singapore, and for any sector. So we've produced lots of very comprehensive sector-neutral guidance, but in addition to that, we're also producing some sector-specific guidance, and that's currently out for consultation. The consultation for that ends the end of December, and there are 7 sectors that are covered. So there are 4 real economy sectors. That's power generation and power utilities. It's food, the food and beverage sector. It's metals and mining and oil and gas. And then for the finance system, it is banking, asset management, and asset owners. So please have a look at that sector-specific guidance if you're interested. One of the key things about transition plans is that it's not just about the entity's decarbonisation plan and how it's going to back that up. We call for a strategic and rounded approach, and that essentially means that preparers, entities with transition plans need to think about how they're going to be contributing to wider societal decarbonisation. So it's not just about decarbonising themselves and decarbonising, if they're a financial institution, their loan book or their investment portfolio. It's about this wider contribution, and that's really important because what we want to avoid in all of this is this idea of paper decarbonisation, and this is particularly acute in the financial services sector, where if you've got a net zero target, you're an investment manager, the way you meet that is by divesting from companies. And actually that makes those companies somebody else's problem, and we don't think that is necessarily the right way to go about the finance sector making a contribution to net zero and to tackling climate change. So preparers need to think about that. I could go on. There are a lot of materials available online. You can Google and find our website, and we have also details to support preparers and users of transition plans, and there's guidance on how you can build your own transition plan and the steps you should take to do that systematically. But one of the things that's been a feature of our work, we started very much focused on net zero and climate mitigation, but actually we've had work streams focused also on nature and biodiversity, also work streams on adaptation and climate adaptation and climate resilience, and also the just transition. So I think in the future, in the next few years, actually we will see transition plans in that wider context. So it won't just be net zero or climate mitigation. We'll have holistic sustainability transition plans that look at all those different issues: mitigation, adaptation, nature, and just transition. And we really have to do that. Then I just finally say the use cases here are very significant, and this is one reason why this is not going to go away. It's not just about large companies, listed companies, disclosing their transition plans to their investors. Transition plans will underpin transition finance. They will underpin sustainability-linked instruments. You mentioned sustainability-linked issuance just a second ago, Agnes, but there are other ways it'll be used. It'll be used by governments in terms of procurement. You won't get a procurement contract unless you have a credible transition plan. It'll be used in regulated sectors. If you're a water company in a regulated sector, you'll need to demonstrate you'll have a transition plan. It'll be used in planning decisions, infrastructure decisions. It'll be used obviously for stewardship and engagement, and Ellie already mentioned that use case. It'll be used by governments to decide where tax credit should go and where subsidies should go. It'll be used by public financial institutions to decide who will get access to concessional finance, amongst other things. So transition plans will have multiple use cases, and we're now exploring those as well. Let me stop there.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm so glad to hear that your TPT is also applicable in Hong Kong. We can use it in Hong Kong, and our government can refer to it, because we're still waiting for a transition plan for Hong Kong to be published. I believe it's under consultation. But let me just turn to the panel now. Not every company is a trailblazer like Swire Properties. So there are companies that are not so ready or maybe a little bit behind in their climate transition journey, or even they don't have a plan. So let me turn to Ronald. Ronald, with your expertise in energy and in banking, could you tell us what actually Societe looks for in your portfolio companies' climate transition pledges and plans, and how do you actually help them with your innovative solutions?
Sure. So we at Societe, we are doing a number of things to support our clients on their decarbonization journey. So first, we are actually rethinking our business model, and we have embarked on something what we call a shift to help our clients to finance their transition investments. So as you know, many of the new investments, they would involve like new technologies. It would involve like new revenue models, and then new financing scheme. And the whole bank, we are actually adapting our business model, adapting our financing and advisory services to help our clients to finance those investments. One example is like we have acted as a structuring bank for one of the first non-recourse project financing in China for distributed solar panel portfolio. And then that actually involves like a lot of like detailed analysis about basically who are the counterparties who are paying for the power revenue, and structure it to make it bankable. And then another example is like we are actually actively working with like several clients in their new green hydrogen and carbon capture projects around the world. So we are helping them to design the business model, make it viable, and then also try to make it bankable and sellable to capital markets participants as well. And second, how we can help our clients is we can structure sustainable finance solutions and help them tap the sustainable finance market. So usually the first step we'll do is we'll look at the client's sustainability track record, and then their strategy. So we'll look at like how they did in terms of like carbon footprint. We'll also look at like what kind of ambition they have in terms of like GHG emissions reductions target. And we'll also basically look at like how much they're actually doing in terms of like, for example, money putting into these kind of like investments to see like how much forward they are moving at. And for companies that are ready to or maybe suitable to tap the sustainable finance market, then we will actually, we could help them to structure a sustainable finance framework to outline their strategy, and then, for example, the user proceeds of the financing, or like the kind of KPIs or targets for their financing to actually communicate it to the broader stakeholders. So maybe talk a little bit about the details. Is like if we want to help them to raise green financing, a user proceeds financing, then a lot of times we'll help them to first like identify the eligible green assets, and then help them to raise the loans or bonds to finance or refinance those. And for example, if we want to help them, or if they are suitable for sustainability-linked financing, then we'll help them to design material sustainability KPIs and ambitious sustainability targets, so they can basically build into their financing and then achieve that over time. And another thing we are doing at Societe is we also have a framework for engagement with our clients on ENS topics. So among the ENS topics, transition efforts is actually a very key element when we discuss with our clients. So with that, we have developed what we call a transition opportunities potential tool to assess their climate transition strategies. So the tools actually, in summary, includes both backward-looking and forward-looking elements for assessment. So in terms of backward-looking, we'll look at the company, how they did in terms of carbon footprint. Have they been reducing their GHG emissions reduction? And in terms of like another point we look at backward-looking is actually have the clients been diversifying away their carbon emitting business? So we'll look at these items. And then in terms of forward-looking, we'll also look at like how much money they plan to put into transition types of investments, and then what kind of GHG emissions targets they are going to set. And these kind of elements are also what we look for in terms of our clients or corporate transition plans. So in terms of what else we look for in such a transition plan, we also take references to guidelines and standards developed by organizations that we, the finance community, are familiar with. So for example, the International Capital Markets Association, they recently published the Climate Transition Finance Handbook, and in that, there's some guidance. So for example, what we will look for in companies is a long-term science-based target that is aligned with Paris Agreement. And in addition to that, we also look for intermediate, relevant and credible targets, also science-based, leading up to the long-term targets, considering the local situations. So let's say if some companies are in countries that have like a different net zero target than Paris alignment call for, then we would actually consider that for the intermediate targets. And then also we look at like, basically we talk about targets, we also look at how the company plans to achieve those targets. So we need to look at if they have a solid transition plan backed up by CapEx items, specifically targeting certain transition levels. And then like basically with the plans, with the targets, we want to see if the company has put in a governance in place to actually trying to achieve that. So hopefully, basically what the guidelines are focusing on would be the seniority of the governance, and then whether it comes from like senior management who has the lever and the resources to push things through. And there are other items we look at depending on the sectors, but then these are the general items for companies in different sectors alike.
Ronald, this sounds like a lot of work. So the lens that an investor and a bank look through to look at a corporate's credible, workable, robust climate transition plan would be similar, but then the approaches could be very different. So just now we heard Ellie told us something about Fidelity's approach. And let me ask you, Ellie, can you please elaborate a little bit more on your approach, particularly going a little bit beyond greenhouse gas emissions, let's say biodiversity, circular economy, and you mentioned just transition.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, but I was just trying to listen to what Ronald was saying. I think my quick takeaway and try to draw similarities between how a financier and how an investor looks at transition is that the credibility of transition plans is essentially an indicator for people that manage money to reward companies that are making progress. I think that's sort of like the key similarity between how we look at transition. There are of course various ways to measure transition. Some are easier, some are harder. For climate, we can turn to metrics like carbon, and as we know, say the TPT's efforts already putting us on a really good track to assess the credibility of climate transition. But when it comes to nature, we're we're measuring way too many dimensions, right? Because as we understand, yes, nature is a key risk. Nature loss is, not even just an environmental risk according to the World Economic Forum, but how do we measure natural capital loss, right? We're talking about not only species loss, but pollution, land use change. So long story short, we don't have enough data, credible data that everyone can agree on to measure what biodiversity protection improvements really look like. There are many different approaches out there. But from a fund manager's perspective, our bread and butter is to create our products, funds, right? So on top of these different industry guidelines, sector guidelines to set transition plans or to report on ESG or climate, there are also regulations facing us, ESG fund regulations. And in short, we are basically at a stage where we have to disclose the greenness or the level of ESG integration across all of our products. So that's a good thing. It's more work, but it's a great thing for everyone. That means companies that are making a commitment to set credible transition plans and showing real evidence of doing so can be invested by fund strategies that are sort of an ESG tilt. So if you recall the earlier slide that I showed you in my sharing, there's a full spectrum of sustainable investing strategies, right? It's not jumping straight to impact investment with a very hardcore green outcome. So there are ways for investors to reward companies that are sort of tilting towards ESG, but of course the bottom line is that they have to show real science-based evidence and good disclosure, good governance, et cetera, et cetera. So Agnes, to your question about just transition, I realize we've been touching on it, but what is it? I think it's good to maybe share a definition. Essentially, it's to ensure the transition or the shift from a high carbon economy to a lower carbon one without compromising the interests of various stakeholders. We know that to achieve net zero or biodiversity protection, we have to look at all of stakeholders, the full value chain. This is the expectation and the way of different regulations, right? And a lot of times when we look at, say, high impact sectors, say utilities, when we as an investor go and engage in a utility to expect them to, say, shift from higher carbon, say thermal coal-based power generation to renewable, it's not an easy journey, right? I also mentioned in my sharing earlier that it depends on local readiness, their capacity, budget, et cetera. But in the transition, I think it's good to note that, say, in the case of India, and I'm sure many countries as well, if you look at the location of their existing sort of more polluting power plants and where their renewable energy, cleaner energy facilities could be located, they don't really match up. So that in accelerating this energy or lower carbon transition, we may be also advocating for a displacement of jobs, and we'll be hurting the livelihoods of workers that are sort of engaging in the dirtier business activities, if you will. So in the principle of just transition, investors are expecting investee companies to not only think very sort of single focus about the environmental outcome, but also to have a just transition plan to invest in, say, deploying, redeploying, upskilling their workers and basically all the suppliers and value chain players involved so no one is left behind. Sounds like a grand vision, really hard to achieve, but as an investor basically we're raising awareness of this and trying to trigger companies to think broader, think systemically, and to really demonstrate that in their strategy, their expenses, their disclosure, governance, et cetera.
Wow, so much. So we're very glad that we have the gold standard, the TPT framework from the UK that we can reference to. But hearing about all these very high demand, and the demand is increasing for a climate trailblazer like Swire Properties, I would imagine that it's very hard to get to improve and improve and improve. So tell us a little bit, Patrick, about how your top people really commit to going really the credible way of climate transition. And not only that, but also taking care of the wellness of the community.
Thank you, Alex. I think I got a lucky job because my top management, Chief Executive and the Financial Director, are totally on board. And I don't have to spend a lot of efforts actually to convince them to why we do climate stuff. And instead, right, they ask me why not, right? Why not we do more? I think that's just a very, a lucky platform that we're having at Swire. And, but of course, our CEO Forces himself is a strong believer that companies with a strong commitment in sustainability or ESG performance are better prepared to, the systemic climate, socioeconomic stresses and volatility. From his view, sustainability actually brings benefits to the business, to the competitive advantage of the markets, to the products and services that we offer to the market. And so when management look at the climate issues, of course, they understand climate change poses different sort of climate risk, extreme weather, as I mentioned, and that's why we spend a lot of efforts actually to invest in the climate resilience to future-proof a portfolio on one hand. But at the same time, climate change also presents us that's realistically the new opportunities for the business of opportunities. For example, developing low-carbon and climate-resilient properties to meet tenants' increasing demand. I'm very pleased that both Fidelity and SoftGen are very honorable tenants in our Pacific Place complex, and I think there's an element of ESG there. Why they selected those offices to be to house the staff. And so more and more we see that the market in the real estate sector, right? We're seeing growing tenants on looking for buildings that have good. Not go beyond just green building certification platinum, but more on the data, more on the ESG services related to all sorts of stuff, waste, circularity, energy, water, and all the different ESG issues that is related to how a business itself managing the ESG risks and opportunities. So I see that our strong management are actually seeing that, and we are able to sort of quantify that impact, financial impact, within that discussions. Really let them see, these is sort of assumptions that we make, and these are the projections. And I think that is the discussion that we already have in the board meeting, in the senior management discussions. I guess that shows them, that's the right pathway to go. And so I'm very happy to have that discussions and also the support of the senior management. And back to the question on wellness, I guess this is a very important subject, and it's exactly a very key risk and opportunity driver in our business, in particular after the pandemic. And so a platform, very traditionally, we develop buildings that provide the best IAQ, indoor air quality, visual comfort, acoustic comfort, and provision of good quality of water and food, healthy food. I think the demand for green spaces and accessibility to the nature are also gaining popularity among our tenants. So circle back to the point made by Ellie on biodiversity and nature, I guess it's very important. This speaks about how in future our building features should incorporate as much as possible green roofs, landscaping, urban farms, which are highly visible and desirable by many. I'm hopefully to see potentially build property value over time. And so on the topic of nature, I'm also very privileged to have been involved in the development of TNFD framework as one of the members of the global task force. I think the TNFD for ourselves, the pilot so far has been very valuable, give a lot of insight regarding the importance of gathering data, nature-related data, and translate it into some practical and actionable, actions. For example, when we initiate the Taikoo Place redevelopment project back a few years ago, we already, conduct a very comprehensive urban biodiversity study in collaboration with Professor Billy Howe from the University of Hong Kong, and this study helped us to establish the baseline for the value of urban biodiversity level in that, Quarry Bay, Taikoo Place area. And we also, again, propose measures to sort of introduce elements to improve it over time. So we want to measure, what is the biodiversity net gain over time in future. And the study findings also inform sort of a blue-green infrastructure planning in our project, resulting in a design that now currently incorporate large-size feng shui woodlands species. They are all native to Hong Kong, and equivalent to around 70,000 square feet of additional urban green area. Before that, the redevelopment, that was all buildings. But now we have a central park, we call Taikoo Square, which will be around 70,000 square feet of a lot of biodiverse sort of consideration in the landscaping plan. So we also have achieved a very biodiverse sort of theory in when we select every species and genus of the plant species there. What we plan to achieve is, of course, is to have overall approximately 35% of the whole Taikoo Place would be covered by landscape area, and featuring also a continuous tall tree canopy that acts as the green corridor. Actually could connect to facilitate the movement of, for example, birds and butterflies. Bees, for some, may be scary to some, but those are the parts of pollinators. They're important to ecosystem. They connect these biodiversity value with the parks adjacent to Taikoo Place, because if it's just 5 minutes walk, you will be already in the Quarry Bay Country Park. And 5 minutes walk, you will be already in the public parks along the Quarry Bay Promenade. So we sort of connecting, introducing these urban biodiversity landscaping plan to connect all these green resources. So also from the climate perspective, look at the biodiversity value. These investments also raise our climate adaptation ability. As a green space help mitigate the intensity of pluvial flooding that's caused by rainstorm. In particular, the ones in 500 years rainstorm, we've been seeing much more frequent. So how the green space would help alleviate the impact of flooding is very important. So the green space is also improve the district level microclimate by reducing the heat island effects, and also, of course, the air quality level of that district will improve over time. So benefiting the health and well-being of the communities. And this exemplifies how important it is to have nature-positive buildings, which can create value for businesses, people, and the planet. Thank you.
Wow, there's so much that Swire Property is doing that we do not know until we go and visit the new Taikoo Place, right? Go to the park. But all these require investments. And today's topic, our panel's topic, is about attracting finance. So in 1 minute, Patrick, can you give us some benefits of doing so much to attract finance? 60% of your loans are sustainable or green loans, and then you want to increase it to 80%, and you mentioned dim sum. So in 1 minute, can you tell us about all these benefits?
Yeah, I guess the green bonds, when we first started to do our first green bonds back in 2018, it helped already, helped us diversify our investor base. To cover more ESG-oriented institutional investors from the European and global markets. But then starting next year, 2019, we started to do a lot more sustainable linked loans, which we of course record benefits because they are linked to our ESG performance. So if you do well, we can get a margin reduction. So back in 2022, we have already 9 sustainable linked loans totaling around 11.8 billion that were arranged build on that. And we are very happy we have continued to achieve the targets that we set with the banks. And that's why it's also, I think, it's a very good sign to our finance director when they look at, what is our return for our ESG investment. And I think this is part of it to answer from the green financing perspective.
Wow, thank you. So I think we probably don't have Ben online. Please get him back online. I think we lost him about 10 minutes ago. So we haven't finished with the panel. Please see if you can get Ben back on the line. And please prepare your questions. I see that I don't have a lot of questions here, but you can also raise your hand when I open it to the floor. But just last 2 short questions for Ronald. So you mentioned that you look at so many different metrics and attributes before you land on the ESG consideration basis. What about the companies that are so slow or not even have started their journey on climate transition? How do you help them?
Yeah, actually, from our side, we believe basically all companies should be transitioning, and we should be able to help wherever we can. So as mentioned above, we at SocGen, we have a framework for engagement. So what we do is we can actually engage with our clients to provide feedback to them in terms of basically what they have been doing, how are those comparing with their peers, and then also encourage them to progress further in the sustainability journey. And this can be done not only for mature companies late in the journey, but it can be done for companies early in the journeys as well. And then, I mentioned we have a transition opportunity tool. So actually, that is a tool we can actually clearly show our clients where they are, and then what are the gaps or what are the areas that they can further close or further improve to progress along the sustainability journey. And in addition to that, as part of our service offerings, we are also advising carbon-intensive clients on their formulation of a robust climate strategy. So the work could entail like explaining to them what types of disclosure and what are the key items that broad the group of stakeholders will be looking into. And we can recommend to them corporate GHG emissions targets and other climate targets and the emission level that would be well perceived. And we could help them develop ESG storyboard and communication strategy. And once they are at a certain stage, they can actually also tap the sustainable finance market. So in summary, basically, we feel like transition applies to all companies, and we should be able to help to promote people, to promote like clients, and improve them or progress them into the sustainability journey.
Thank you. That's the bank's what Societe can do for you. For Fidelity, 714 billion AUM. A large part of that is ESG and growing. But this year we are seeing some decline in ESG funds inflow. So as a global asset manager, how do you help build this ecosystem so that you can actually catalyze capital to be channeled to climate mitigation and adaptation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to share some numbers here, right? If we look at Q3 ESG fund flows, it came to about 22 billion, which is 23% down year on year. But we are, remaining positive. We think that may have to do with just general market downturn, because if you look at non-ESG fund flows, they're kind of dropping as well. But if we, dig deeper, sustainable thematic funds are really struggling within the sort of like ESG fund space. We think that may have to do with some of the idiosyncratic risk that has to do with energy, based on geopolitical risks that we're seeing around the world, et cetera. But, in terms of key challenges, I think there are a lot, right? I think all of our fellow speakers have touched on data. If we look at Scope 3 data, it remains quite patchy. So if we need to sort of zoom in on understanding companies' climate performance for climate-focused funds, or even just, sort of assessing their overall ESG performance, Scope 3 data may be missing. But that's on the company disclosure side. I mentioned earlier that on the ESG fund regulation side, a lot has been happening as well. The big piece of legislation that I'd like to highlight here is the EU SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. So essentially, SFDR requires us to disclose a fund's sustainability objective, if there's any, and also to sort of dive deeper in two key concepts. One is favorable ESG characteristics, and the second one is sustainable investments. Favorable ESG characteristics are generally measured by ESG rating, but as we know, there's no sort of gold standard for ESG rating yet, right? So asset managers are creating their proprietary ones, there are different external ones, and SFDR, interestingly, relies on asset managers to define their own ways to assess favorable ESG characteristics and sustainable investments, which means there's still many ways to sort of assess what good looks like. But because this piece of legislation has been live for about 2 years, if we look at broker research on the market, it's no longer, about ESG fund versus non-ESG fund. I think the line is starting to blur, meaning the so-called non-ESG fund has a degree of ESG integration as well. It could be as basic as just excluding the very polluting or immoral activities or sectors, right? So with that, with SFDR, we basically, as an asset manager, will have to, reshuffle the way we design our products, and then to sort of look at all of our investee companies and see which bucket they sit in. So again, coming back to today's topic, the more credible a company's transition plan is, the higher the chance they'll be able to access investment capital through asset manager. I think that's kind of the quick take here.
Thank you, Ellie. I think Ben will not be joining us. He has something to run off to, and we're a little bit over time. So I'd like to wrap this session up unless you have some very burning questions that you raise your hand up so high that I will be able to see it. Otherwise, I would like to wrap this up by asking each of our panelists one sentence, one key takeaway that they would like to impart to you as to how to attract climate financing. So let me start with the banker, Ronald.
Yeah, I think transition is a very important topic. So as a bank, we have the responsibility and the privilege to help the companies to transition, and mainly through helping them to raise capital. So we are very happy to be able to accompany our clients on this sustainability journey. And we also see good potential business there as well.
From my end, I think just one word, transparency. As a corporate, I think the more transparent you are in what you're doing, we're not expecting everybody to have the most robust plan already, but be transparent about your intention, your disclosure, and do reach out to your investors to understand how they are looking at you, because we're also on the same journey learning with you and partnering with you.
Okay, for me, transition is a process, and it needs collaboration with your valuing partners and the financiers.
Thank you. There is one comment or question online. Let me just read it. We don't have time because we don't have Ben here to answer this. It says, besides the TPT, there are various transition planning frameworks and tools that are under consultation, including Singapore's MAS transition planning guidance. Can you provide any comment on all your thoughts of the emergence of more transition planning frameworks? What are the actionable steps that we need to take to create convergence? I believe BEC will be having to host another conference or panel to answer this sort of very broad questions as they evolve. So please put your hands together to thank our panelists.